What's going on, guys, and welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be going over everything that is wrong with my 234,000 mile clown shoe. So I picked this car up about a month and a half ago at this point. I've been daily driving it pretty much every day, and basically now I've kind of accustomed to the car, figured out like little quirks and whatever's wrong with it, and today we're going to go over everything that's wrong with a Z3M Coupe that's got 234,000 miles on it. So it's a 1999 Z3M Coupe with the S52, and let's get driving. We'll start talking about what's going on with it. All right, so first off, a little bit about the handling characteristics of this car. So I've had a 325 Ci BMW E46 for like 9 years, coming up on this year. That was my first car, and I pretty much everything you could do to an E46, like chassis-wise, that car has it. So it's got coilovers, poly or solid bushings on all the suspension, subframe, an LSD that I put in, bigger sway bars, the whole 9 yards. And that car I absolutely love the handling of. It's super predictable, it's super planted, super confidence inspiring. And that car is like a dream to drive. You can do autocross, track days, drift events, daily drive it, cross country road trips, tow with it. I have a trailer hitch or a tow hitch put on the car. It does everything. And so far with the clown shoe, what I found is it's very grippy. The handling's very nice, but it's nowhere near as predictable as the E46. So I don't know if that comes down to like old bushings, even though the bushings in this car look to be in pretty good shape. Aside for the front control arm bushings, there's like a little bit of dry rotting going on. So I have polyurethane ones to replace it with. But basically, it kind of seems like it gets bump steer, and then it'll like just a hair of understeer going into corners, and then if you either let off the gas, hit the brakes, or floor it, the rear end just swings around. It's almost like a kind of like a snap oversteer kind of thing. So I know that these have the McPherson front end from the E46, or I'm sorry, the E36 generation of 3 Series, but they use E30 generation rear suspension. So it's a weird like cross beam kind of suspension architecture, where the subframe is just like a crossbar that goes across the front of the rear area of the car, and then the trailing arms are like a triangle that basically pivot down to they're pivoting at the front points to a single point at the rear where the wheel bearing is. And so you can't adjust toe or camber on them. They're fixed. The only solution is to weld like essentially alignment adjuster tabs as the trailing arm mounts onto the subframe. And so this thing's got all original bushings. Well, maybe they've been replaced, but like stock rubber bushings, and I think either Bilstein or Coney shocks on it. So it's still stock springs. Like, it rides well, it's just kind of unpredictable. And so that's one thing that I found so far. So I'm excited to start actually modifying the suspension once I get maintenance stuff taken care of, and kind of see what I can do with this chassis. From things that I've read, it kind of seems like this chassis has always just kind of had an inferior handling characteristic compared to like the Z4M. But still, it kind of makes it a lot of fun. It's kind of like a Miata, where it's like, it's fast enough to have fun, and it's just kind of like squishy, rolly, and just like a very dynamic driving experience. So it makes it a lot of fun to drive, which I do enjoy at the end of the day. Even though it's not as predictable to drive aggressively. But I will be taking it to the track, maybe not this season, but next season I will. There's a local track called Audubon Country Club in Joliet, Illinois that I love. The full circuit is awesome because it's a combination of like a little bit of straightaways, but a pretty technical course, so it's a lot of fun. So in addition to the handling, what I'm not really used to with this car, it's still a 5-speed transmission, I believe the ZF Trans. It feels really good, it's notchy, like no shifter play. The car had a new clutch put in right before I bought it, basically. And they did the whole like shifter detent service and all that, which is basically where the Trans, like, it becomes very vague. Like the gates for like specifically 5th gear are not very, like you don't feel them very much. So the Trans feels good, but it's geared really tall. the E46 comes with, at least mine, came with a 3.15 rear end ratio in it. And I swapped in a 3.46 out of an automatic E46 and put the LSD in that. So that thing's got super short gears, so you just rev it out, like you're in third gear by the time you're hitting 60. So like it's a lot of fun and engaging to drive. Whereas this thing, it's still fun, but the gears are really long. So I wouldn't mind re-gearing it down the road. The stock clutch type LSD that's in this thing works really well. It locks right up, doesn't make any noise. So I don't know if I'd really need to rebuild it, like have that excuse, but it would be nice to get a taller rear end ratio, and I believe you could pretty much swap in any ring gear from any of the E30 generation differentials. So maybe that's something I would do down the road. So that's kind of what the handling characteristics of the car are, but now we could get into what's actually wrong with the thing. So I have put on just about 2,500 or so miles on it since I bought it. Math checks out. Yeah, math checks out. 2,500 miles on it. And so far it's been really good. The first, like, after 2 weeks of having it, I did an oil change and spark plugs. I sent an oil sample out for analysis with a place called Blackstone Laboratories, which you could send in a sample of like engine, trans, or diff fluid, whatever you want, gas or diesel, doesn't matter. And they'll tell you essentially based off of, oh shit. So I sent that out, and essentially the motor, like the oil sample looked great for the miles. They said there's no concerns really. I could put a screenshot up on the screen right now. And in addition to that, when I did the spark plugs, I pulled them all out and did a compression test, and every cylinder was within like 5 psi of each other. So the motor's healthy, which I'm happy about, and it just goes to show with these older BMWs, as long as you change the oil, keep good oil in them, and change the oil regularly, like they just go forever. Make sure you keep up with the cooling system refreshes so you don't overheat it, and they're just solid. So that's awesome. One other thing specific to the motor of this car is that on cold starts every time pretty much. I thought the spark plugs would fix this, but every time on a cold start, it starts up fine, but then it has like a little bit of a misfire pretty much up until the secondary air pump shuts off for the emissions thing to like warm up the cats. So what I've read is that it could be a sticky idle control valve, as well as potentially like a cracked air intake boot, both of which are easy to do. The valve you just clean out, the boot you can replace. I just got to look into it. So that's one thing. Otherwise, the engine runs great. I bought a Vanos rebuild kit for it just because at this mileage, I don't know if it's ever been done. And basically, when the Vanos seals go out on these BMW motors, you just kind of lose a little bit of low-end torque. You'll feel like a big surge in power after like 3,000 or 4,000 RPM. And some days I feel like it's pretty smooth and linear throughout the whole rev range, and sometimes I feel like it is kind of sluggish down low and then it opens up over like $4,000. So I think it's probably just time to do the Vanos seals. So it's another thing on the list. Another issue that I have that's really annoying, it's a minor thing, but it's common for these seats. There's essentially, it's an electric seat, so you push the button and it moves forward and back. It's basically just a screw that the slider rides on, and like a threaded block. And on either side of that metal threaded block is like a plastic spacer, essentially, or bushing. And over the years, they just kind of wear out and end up falling apart. So now I get play. So like every time I hit the gas and the brake, like my seat just goes forwards and backwards. So that kind of drives me nuts a little bit. And that's, again, something that I have. I have those parts waiting at home. I just got to get around to doing it. Not a big deal. But it just makes it annoying. It's both the driver and the passenger seat. So I've had passengers be like, hey, what's up with the seat? And I'm like, yeah, I got to fix it. So another old BMW issue to fix. Air conditioning. Air conditioning, obviously a very important and enjoyable thing to have in a daily driver car. With this car, I have service records of the air conditioning being not recharged, but flushed out, and a new Freon being put in, basically like an AC refresh. And that was like just over 200,000 miles, 200 and change. And the AC works great as long as you're moving in the car. If it's like a hot day out, like 90 to 100 degrees, and you're like in stop and go traffic, it's cool, but it's not that cold. When you're moving, it's ice cold. Like right now, it's fine. And so normally, like that'd be kind of an issue of low Freon. So I checked the Freon; it was completely full. And then the other thing being, there's the auxiliary fan at the front of the radiator, which cools off the condenser when you're in stop and go traffic when there's no airflow. and the fan kicks on and it looks like it gets up to full speed. So I'm not really sure if it's just a kind of a flaw of this car where the AC just doesn't work as well in the super hot temperatures and stop and go traffic, but it is kind of a little nuisance that I have. But for the most part, it's completely bearable, not really a big thing, just kind of nitpicky. Interior. So the interior of this car has held up pretty good. For the most part, these materials from this generation of BMW were pretty not so great. From what I remember reading, they tried to keep every material, if it's plastic, it's just plastic. It's not like a hybrid of like plastic and like fiberglass reinforced plastic or something like that. Everything was just like a plastic material, so it all kind of like doesn't feel great. There's not many like real creaks or anything. The glove boxes sag on these, which I fixed. It's just a reinforcement bracket they put in there. The dash is in really good shape, aside from like one little scratch, which I don't know how that happened. Maybe I could take it out, not sure, haven't tried all that hard yet. The gauges on the dash, everything works fine. There's a couple bulbs out in the cluster. The needles are nice and red, but now when you go to the center 3 gauges in the center console, the needles are kind of faded. They all work, aside from the oil temp gauge, which started acting up, where it'll just like peg to max randomly. If I tap on the glass, it'll come back depending on the day, basically. So I did some research. Supposedly, like, you can check the grounds, but I think if the ground would be bad, it would go all the way to 0, whereas this goes all the way to max. So I think the gauge itself is just going. But on top of that, the red needles are faded. They're like an orange, yellowy, white, like just a sun-faded color. So, of course, almost everything for this car is like discontinued. I feel like every part I try to order that's like genuine BMW, I get an email saying I'm getting a refund because they don't make it anymore. So the oil temp and the voltage gauge, there were a couple left in the dealers here, or I think in Germany. So I have new ones that I have at home. The clock is discontinued and unavailable, but the company that's on the gauges, VDO, they're still around. So I'm wondering if I could reach out to them and maybe try to ask them if they'd like rebuild the clock for me, just like new needles, clean up or change the glass, and just make it look really nice again. A little minor touch, minor detail, but something I'd like to do. In addition to that, as far as interior goes, everything's pretty good aside from the headliners kind of sagging up here. As soon as I brought it home and I drove around with like the windows down and it was humid out, it just started sagging. That's a common BMW wide thing. Like the glue just gives up on the headliner and it starts to sag. So I got to pull all the A, B, and C pillars off and then the headliner and recover all of them, and just cross my fingers that I don't break all the clips on these things, because that's going to be a nightmare, because I'm assuming you can't get new trim panels anymore, and I don't want the thing to rattle like crazy, because right now the interior is really nice and tight, aside from like the speaker grill on the subwoofer that kind of rattles sometimes with music when you're playing it louder. So that's on the list. The door panel as well, the driver's side door panel has the material like pulls up on the corners, which is common. I think what I'm just going to end up doing is I'm going to pull the door panel eventually to take the mirrors off anyway and respray them. So I'll probably just re-glue that door panel once I'm doing that. So shouldn't be a big deal. Hopefully just tuck it back in so you wouldn't even tell that it happened. Now let's talk radio. These things were not known to have fantastic sound systems to begin with. However, this thing, looking at the Carfax, it almost seems like the car was maybe driven by like the dealership manager for the first like year or two that it was owned, and then it seems like someone may have broken in and stolen the radio out of it, because it had like it had a service for replacing the trunk key latch, like the latch mechanism for the trunk. So I'm assuming someone broke in through the trunk and tried to steal the amp and or the radio, because actually if you look in the trunk, and I didn't notice this until after I bought the car, but when you take the retractable cover all the way back, the top of the trim piece that covers the amplifier has like a big hole, literally sawzalled out, and just like a piece of plastic half-ass glued over it. So it looks really ugly. Of course, that's a discontinued part, but I found someone on eBay that had a couple leftover brand new OEM ones in like Germany or Latvia. So I bought that, and that's getting shipped over. So I'll be replacing that, and then looking into the amp wiring, because when I take that plate off and look at the wiring, it looks like it was all spliced into where the connector goes into the amp. So the speakers in the footwell and the door panels and the subwoofer are working. So once that trim panel comes in for the amp cover, that's when I'll take everything apart and start kind of looking into the wiring. Another thing to add onto the list. speaking of brakes, when I picked this thing up, it had a pretty bad vibration during braking. The guy that I bought it from, he put like 500 miles on the thing in like the 4 or so years that he owned it. So it sat most of the time, and he'd wash it once in a while. So the rotors got pretty rusty. And when the car sat for so long without being driven all that much, there's just a lot of rust buildup on the rotor, specifically the front left rotor. And that's worked its way out significantly in the time that I've been driving it. But I have a whole new set of brake rotors, brake pads, and stainless braided brake lines for this thing that I'm gonna gonna replace them with. So the front, I bought Z3M floating Euro front rotors for this thing. So apparently every region except for the US, the front, so apparently every region except the US of this car got floating front rotors. So if I'm not mistaken, it'd be an aluminum rotor hat, the centerpiece, and then your steel friction disc material on the outside. And so what that does is it's better cooling because you have the aluminum hat, so it just dissipates heat better, and then you have less rotational mass, less unsprung weight because of the aluminum. So just a better design, and I guess they kind of cheaped out on it in the US, because why wouldn't they? Europe got the S50, we got the S52. They got fancy brakes, we got regular brakes. So yeah, just another little upgrade I'll be doing on the car, which is something to look forward to. One minor detail, when I got the car, it had these like weird cheap floor mats in it. They didn't really look nice. They looked like almost like shag carpet. They were black, but they just kind of looked weird, and they were oversized. They kind of contoured to the foot or the pedal box of this car, but they just did not fit. So they bunch up by the seat, and then they bunch up by the pedal. So it just drove me nuts. And the OEM BMW floor mats are discontinued because why not? And so I called up, like I ordered them from FCP Euro because they said they're in stock. Then I got an email, hey, they're actually out of stock, we can't find them. I tried a bunch of different websites, and same thing, like I just keep getting a refund of my money, and then they tell me that the part's discontinued. So I called up a couple BMW dealerships, and there was actually a dealership in Ohio that had like 5 sets of the floor mats left, and I really like how they look. They have like the little M logo. They've most importantly fit the actual pedal box of the car so they don't bunch up. And they just look nice, and so I ended up buying 2 sets just because floor mats, sometimes you kind of go through them. If you don't, you know, stuff happens, stains, spills, whatever, or you wear through them with your feet. So I got 2 pairs just in case. The other thing I'd like to get is the trunk mat that matches the floor mats, but that's discontinued. No one has any in stock, and there was one on eBay that sold like a week before I bought the car apparently. So I'm kind of on the hunt for that. If that ever comes up anywhere on the internet, I'm definitely going to buy one. Just kind of a nice to have thing. Oh, in addition to the engine, when I was talking about the Vanos stuff, the Vanos oil line is a little leaky, which is common. Oil filter housing, gasket, oil pan. It has like maybe a seep, but it honestly could just be leaking down from that oil filter housing. Just typical gasket issues with these cars. There's the valve cover, oil filter housing, oil pan, and rear main seal. Those are kind of the main things, all of which are pretty reasonable to do aside from the rear main, which obviously you have to drop the transmission. That one's kind of more involved. So I think that about covers it from a driving perspective. For the most part, like there's nothing majorly wrong with the car. It's just an old car and needs a little bit of TLC, and it's stuff that I'm excited to work on and improve on this thing. So at this point, let's go take it to the outside of the car and go over what's up with the exterior. All right, so now we're at the exterior of the clown shoe, and I'll start off with this. So when I bought the car, there was originally like a pretty wild looking like compound dent here. I'll put a picture in. It was like a bubble pushed in here and here, and there was like a straight across like crease that happened here. And I got that taken out by a really good PDR guy like about a week ago, and I mean, like aside from like the little scuff marks that are left over, you would never know that this thing had a big dent in it. He did a really nice job. There's some paint work I want to do on the car first, specifically like the clear coat peel on this mirror, and then the base of the driver's side mirror right here. There's a little bit of rust coming up. And then ideally I'd like to also have a body shop sand and repaint the side skirts, because on the bottom of them there's just the way they have the fender liners designed on these cars, they don't actually cover the side skirt, so you get a whole bunch of rock chips here, and then there's actually, it'll end up surface rusting right where the paint chips. So I'd like to get those repainted. And then once I do that, get the whole car detailed. In addition to those couple little spots, the hatch right here, right around the wiper, it's kind of common for them to, I guess the paint fails and then you end up getting a little bit of like rust bubbles coming up. So it's not like there's anything major rotting on this, and the underside of the car is really clean. There's just a couple little like paint defect spots, basically like the side skirts and the hatch and the mirrors where a little bit of rust comes up. So common issues. Actually, one other thing with the hatch, when you pop the hatch, you have your wiring harnesses right here and right here. They go to the windshield defroster, obviously the trunk latch, and then the third brake light. And so on mine, the third brake light and the defroster don't work. So I'm gonna have to figure out which one of those harnesses go to those two, and actually end up taking them apart and then probably resoldering wires. They just fatigue over the years of opening and closing the hatch. And then the connections break, so you end up just losing functionality of those parts. So this is that front left brake rotor that I was talking about. It just like has a lot of buildup, whether it's pad material or a little bit of surface rust, and I think this was the main reason why that steering wheel is kind of shaky. And in addition to that, like just the brake pads that are on the car dust so badly. I want to replace them anyway, because it's just like I'll wash the car and like 2 days worth of driving later, the wheels are just black, so it's kind of obnoxious. As far as the front end, everything's pretty good here. The front bumper, rear bumper, and hood were repainted due to rock chips, and they did a pretty okay job. The only thing is these gaps right here on this side specifically don't line up that well. I think I have to realign the bumper and then the headlight, and then I can kind of match this gap to this side, because if I pop the hood, it doesn't look like the actual bolts for the hood have ever been touched. The paint is all intact, so it doesn't look like the hood's been taken off to get painted and readjusted. So it might have something to do with the bumper and headlights. As far as the engine bay, this Vanos oil line just ends up getting kind of leaky, so that's got to get replaced. The oil filter housing gasket for this valve cover gasket is going to get replaced when I do the Vanos, so that'll be kind of like a while I'm there kind of thing. Otherwise, engine bay's clean. I mean, it probably needs a cooling system refresh just for peace of mind. Knock on wood, I haven't had issues yet, but I know the radiator fan was replaced pretty recently, so I'm not too worried about that guy. But I would like to do the water pump, hoses, and expansion tank just to be safe, make sure the cooling system's up to snuff. All right, so with all that said, that's pretty much sums up everything that's wrong with my 234,000 mile Z3M Coupe. Now it's going to be a journey to get this thing up to my standards. So looking forward to making more videos, kind of fixing this thing up and then doing some modifications, making it my own. So stay tuned for more videos on this thing, and leave a like, comment, let me know what you want to see, any videos specifically of this thing, and any, I guess, video ideas you guys want to see in the future. So thank you and take care. See you next time.